Hello, everyone. I am Aydoğan Vatandaş, the editor-in-chief of Politico.com. Today, I have a remarkable guest, a Professor Anne Speckhard from Georgetown University. She is one of the most credible experts on violent extremism and radical terrorist organization. She has written many books about ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and related terrorist organization. Professor Speckhard, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Glad to be on your podcast.
Thank you so much. So it's been a long time that we haven't heard about ISIS. So just yesterday, U.S. State Department made an announcement about ISIS, and they talked about their commitment to defeat ISIS. So what do you think about that announcement? Because we were thinking that ISIS has already been defeated. So what is the most recent developments about ISIS?
Well, I think we have to think about this about militant jihadist terrorism more generally, and that as long as people know how to manipulate a world religion, it's going to be with us for an awfully long time, because there's grievances all around the world. Muslims are in the billions, and the militant jihadist ideology that ISIS uses, Al-Shabaab uses, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, it's all a manipulation, a claim that they found the true Islam, and that in this true version of Islam that you can use your body as a suicide vehicle, and that you can kill yourself to kill others, and that will land you in paradise, and that there's a claim that you have to fight jihad, that it's an individual duty, that you have to travel to places where caliphates are declared, you have to live under Sharia law, and that you have to follow the practice of, I think it's called wala wa bara, separating yourself from others and declaring them enemies. And none of this is, in my view, and I'm not an Islamic scholar, but I have an Islamic scholar on staff, an accurate interpretation of Islam. Most Muslims wouldn't recognize it as their Islam. But as long as these distortions exist, and groups to manipulate grievances and people to follow this ideology, we'll see either ISIS or an offshoot of ISIS for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that ISIS is active in Iraq and Syria. The numbers that are in ISIS are the same as when ISIS started up.
So are they still recruiting people from different parts of the world? Are they still successful on this?
Some people still travel to Syria, but most do not. And the propaganda is urging people to fight back in their home countries, to revenge to those militaries in those countries that fought against ISIS, that defeated the physical caliphate. So we just saw this ISIS, well, we don't know if it's an ISIS attack yet, or at least I don't know if it's an ISIS attack yet, but we just saw this attack in Liverpool, and people were putting things together and saying that it was close by where there was a remembrance day event, which if it is ISIS, that would make sense, cause harm to military or relatives of military that helped to defeat the caliphate. And this is exactly what they're calling for. And we saw an attack by militant jihadists in Uganda today. Mm-hmm. So yes, this is still with us, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. How many terrorists did you interview so far?
I have lost track, but I think it's around 800.
800.
And then in the last year, I started talking to white supremacists as well. And I wouldn't say that these people are terrorists, but they're following a virulent ideology, in some cases mixed with religion when they follow Christian identity. And that number is 50. But yeah, I've talked to quite a few, and I guess I'm pretty good at talking to people that are in violent extremism and terrorism.
Mm-hmm. So as far as I know, you interviewed also Mansour al-Gharib. So he was claiming to be the ambassador of ISIS to Turkey. and he was dealing with communication with the Turkish government and the Turkish intelligence. So what did you learn during this interview from Mr. Mansour al-Gharib? So what was the communication about between the Turkish government and ISIS?
Well, I did this interview a while back. I think it was, 2019. And it was a very interesting interview. I did it in Iraq. The counterterrorism services in Iraq allowed me to do interviews for our Breaking the ISIS brand counter-narrative project, which is where we interview ISIS people, and then we use the interview, if it's appropriate, to create counter-narrative content.
So you're saying that the Iraqi government allowed you to interview him?
Yes.
Okay.
I was in prison, and I think we made 20 or 30 interviews on that trip, and he was one of them. And
how did you pick him? How did you pick him?
I didn't pick him. They gave me people to interview from ISIS, men and women, and youth that were under 18. And they brought him in, and I had no background. They don't share any intel with me. And what was interesting is they just sat back and watched me, the Iraqis. And I think sometimes I find this with security services that allow me into the prisons, that they kind of like to watch what I do and, maybe learn a different method, because they're interrogators and I'm not an interrogator. I'm a psychologist, and I'm not looking for what were your crimes. I'm looking for what motivated you. What were your experiences? How did you get disillusioned? If you did get disillusioned, if you left, how did you leave? And, how this works, basically. But I don't care what your crimes are. And if you start telling me your crimes, I usually stop you, other than to say, yes, you were in ISIS and what your role in ISIS was. In his case, he sat down and started telling me about that he had come from Morocco, that he had been following Al-Qaeda, jihadist ideology and groups on the internet for quite a long time, and always dreaming of the groups coming together to form some kind of caliphate, and that the brothers had decided that the time was right, that Syria was the right place and time, and the brothers had gone ahead of him from Egypt, from this internet group. And so he decided to make the jump. He went too, and expecting it to be utopia, and that they were going to build something good and beautiful, and they were going to protect the Syrian people from Assad. And he told me that his job was doing intakes, so that he was on the border and he did intakes. So since he was Moroccan, and I lived in Belgium for 7 years, and there were a lot of Belgian Moroccans that had gone, and I had interviewed some of them, I mentioned something about the numbers, and he right away came back at me and he said, no, there were only 333 from Belgium, and there were 5,000 from Morocco. I'm throwing these numbers out and making them up. And then he went on to list all these numbers from different countries. And I said, wait a minute, you weren't just an intake guy, and you didn't just have one place on the border. You sound like you know the whole border. And he goes, oh, well, I moved up and I became in charge of the whole border. And I said, okay. And he continued to tell me facts that only an emir would know. So then I said, no, you weren't an ordinary ISIS guy, you were an emir. And he started laughing. And so from the beginning, this was a guy that was willing to tell a story. And we spent, I spent 5 hours with him. And we spent maybe an hour and a half talking about all the background in Morocco, what his dreams were, how he was thinking as a jihadist supporter, a jihadist dreamer, and how he finally made that move to jump on a plane and go somewhere to be in jihad, and what he expected it to be and what it actually was. So he wasn't sitting down saying, I was an emir, I negotiated these things with Turkey. It came out slowly over 5 hours. And he just kind of laughed, chagrined, when I figured out he was an emir. He was like, yeah, I was an emir. And, it wasn't like he wanted to brag. So this made it more believable, actually, for me. And the other thing that made him believable to me is that the Iraqi guys laughed afterwards. I said, wow, that was quite an interview, and thank you for letting me sit with him for 5 hours. And they said, yeah, we thought you'd like that one. And we're glad you figured out who he really was. And they said, we think he's very cooperative. and we consider him extremely credible.
So, are you saying that Iraqi government also knew his connections with the Turkish government? Probably.
I don't know, because
you don't know that?
they interrogate people on their own, and I'm not privy to that. And I don't ask for their intel. I do my own interviews.
Okay.
But
so what did you learn from that interview? So what was he doing with Turkish intelligence?
I'll tell you. But first, I would just want to clarify that they listened to the entire interview and they heard all the relationship with the Turks. And they said that he was very credible, that they trusted him, that he had cooperated, that they thought everything he said was true. So I didn't say, did you also get this in your interview? I don't ask those kind of questions because that's not my place. It would be two interrogators talking to each other, and I'm not an interrogator. But what he said about the Turkish government is that as he started talking about the border, I asked him, did people leave to go into Turkey to get medical care? And he said, oh, yes, we arranged that with the Turks. So we had arrangements with Turkish intelligence. And we would call them if we had somebody that we wanted to send across the border, and they would arrange for an ambulance to meet our guy. And, so he would have the border crossing arranged and the ambulance to take him to a hospital. And he said, we frequently had meetings either on the Syrian side or on the Turkish side with, it's MIT, isn't it? With MIT. And we would negotiate. He said, one of the things that they were getting concerned about was that as time went on, people around the world were starting to understand this whole flow of people going into 40,000 people from 110 countries going into Syria to join all the groups was going through Turkey. So they said, if your people are Moroccans from Belgium or Turks from Belgium or Turks from Germany, they can cross the normal border, no problem, during the day, because people that see that from the outside, drone, however they would surveil it, would legitimately think those were Syrians crossing the border. But if they're white guys and they don't look Syrian, they need to cross at night and they need to cross in small groups. So they worked that out. And that was for Turkey to not look complicit in the foreign fighters coming in. He also said that the Turks had shut down the water flow into, I think it's the Euphrates. Is it the Euphrates? I don't remember.
Yes.
That would be in the Topka Dam, and the Topka Dam provides the electricity. And so they needed the water to be opened up again, and he negotiated water levels with the Turks. He said at one point that he was in Ankara, and they told him that he would meet President Erdogan. And I have to say that is one of the times when I got kind of flipped out in an interview, because I have many times been in Ankara and spoken at the NATO Center of Excellence. And I just kind of lost it for a few minutes and said, what hotel did you stay at? Because I was imagining, could I have stayed at the same hotel as this guy when he was in ISIS? And he laughed and he said, no, I was in I think he said a MIT safe house or a military safe house, but he wasn't in a hotel. And he didn't meet Erdogan, but he was told that he would. Let's see, what else did they negotiate? It's all in the paper that we've written, and I didn't pull that up to look at. Let me see. I don't remember what else.
Anything about the weapons, oil, trade?
He said weapons they didn't need to get from, they didn't need anybody to give them weapons because they were making so much money from the oil. And that too made it really convincing how high up he was in ISIS, because he could just spout out budget figures and how the budget worked. And he said, when I first came into prison, I knew all the budget figures. I knew them by heart, but that's faded from memory because that wasn't my responsibility. But he said that they bought a lot of their weapons from Free Syrian Army, which is such a shame because Free Syrian Army was supplied with weapons by the West. And so he said Turkey was not complicit in that, I don't think. Let's see. Yeah, here I have it. I just pulled up the article. He said, actually, we didn't need to get weapons from Turkey. We would get them from the Free Syrian Army. And that the oil was enough to pay. And I think they sold most of their oil to Syria, but some to Turkey. Yeah, I said Turkey sometimes open an operation in which the management for one battle is 10 million.
Mhm.
Let's see. And then crossing the borders, negotiating for water, oil, let's see. Yeah, he said most of the oil was going to Turkey and just small amounts went to the Bashar regime. And I think that has been proven by journalists that
Yes.
ISIS oil was going into Turkey. And I think President Erdogan's son has now a fleet of ships
Mhm.
as a result of that, according to journalists, not according to my
Mhm.
own research. But this Abu Mansour was confirming that was the market for oil.
Mhm.
And let's see.
This
When they
story.
negotiated for the release of the Turkish diplomats and the soldiers
Mhm.
and citizens. So, there was an awful lot. I mean, it was a bit of a shocking interview, to be
Mhm.
honest, to hear all of this. And then you also have a Turk that was an emir that's still in Syrian prison. And I interviewed him as well. And he was one of the guys that traveled with Abu Mansour. I interviewed him before I interviewed Abu Mansour, so I couldn't go back and check with him, but he was saying similar things. But he didn't tell me about all these negotiations with the Turks because I didn't know to ask. And sometimes they'll hold things back that if you don't ask them. And I'm not someone that asks a lot of
Mhm.
criminal type questions.
ISIS also claimed some attacks in Turkey in these years in between I think it was in 2017 or between 2017 and 2019, and he says that it was actually mixed connections in ISIS who were doing these things. Am I correct? So what
Yeah,
exactly did it tell you about these
yeah,
attacks in Turkey in these years?
yeah. Let's see. Well, he says these ISIS attacks in Turkey were directed from Raqqa, and the ISIS external EMNI, the EMNI is their intelligence organ, ordered it. And that he thought that there were Turkish MIT guys inside the external EMNI. And that these are his exact words. I suspected that striking at the airport was not for the benefit of ISIS, but Turkish groups of ISIS who wanted to strike Turkey, or they were affected by other agencies that don't want a relationship between Ad-Dawla, that's ISIS, and Turkey. It makes no sense otherwise because most of our people came through that airport. These orders for these attacks in Turkey were from those MIT guys inside Dawla, but not from our political side. They didn't want to destroy Erdogan, just change his road in the matter of the Syrian issue. They wanted him to use his army to attack Syria and to attack Dawla. So basically, to push Erdogan into coming into Syria and expanding Erdogan's
Mhm.
possible dream of reclaiming an Ottoman Empire. And
Mhm.
I asked him, is this conspiracy theory? And he said, no, it's not conspiracy theory. And he said that the Turkish government, after they were in Raqqa, took 40 people out of Raqqa that were part of Turkish security agencies. So I don't know.
Mhm.
I mean, that part is what he says. Is it true? Is it not? I don't know.
So do you think, Annie, do you think that the American government's intelligence agencies didn't know all these things? What do you think about that? I mean, did they learn all these things from you, or did they already know about these things and just let these things happen, or did they have any disputes with the Turkish government regarding the Turkish government involvement with ISIS?
Well, Abu Mansour was captured in Syria, and our guys took him to Iraq. So,
Americans?
yes.
Americans took him to
Yeah.
Iraq. Okay.
Yeah. And high value ISIS people are generally taken out of Syria into Iraq, and they're interrogated, of course. So I would assume that my government knew everything.
Mhm.
So this isn't news. And then the reason that I was able to interview Abu Mansour, that he was available in CTS, because CTS takes people off the battleground and holds them for a while, and then they go to justice ministry. And once they've been processed through justice ministry, they're held in a different facility under a different authority. But someone had requested, a foreign government, and I think it was mine, had requested to speak with him again, probably triangulating on something. And,
with Abu Mansur.
yeah, so he was in CTS, and that's why they threw him to me. Otherwise, I would have never been able to access him through CTS. And so I don't know. But again, those are questions that I don't ask because it's not my business. I'm not an interrogator. I'm not, chasing the crimes down. I'm just trying to figure out, how did this organization work, and how did they recruit? Why did people respond to them the way they did, and what could we do about it? But you find out all kinds of things you didn't ask. And so yes, I think the Americans know. I did meet American interrogators in the prison at the same time I was there. But again, I don't ask them, what are you doing here? What's your business? Because number one, I don't think they're going to tell me. And number two, I just, it's not what I do.
Okay. Turkey is also a NATO country. So do you think that American government or NATO reacted to Turkey enough about these things, or just kept quiet?
Well, I was really disturbed when I found out that the journalists that put the information out that Erdogan's son had now a fleet of ships, and that oil had been coming in from ISIS for a long time, and it was shown in aerial footage. I think it might have been Russians that first published that.
I think Russians sent a letter to United Nations about all these ISIS-Turkey relations.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But anyway, there were a number of things that disturbed me, and I'm sure you know about the...
Do you remember which journalists revealed? No,
I don't remember. But and then you also had when the police discovered what the military were doing, bringing in weapons hidden underneath medicine in trucks. And it was a big mess. And that was, a lot of accusations that was Gulen behind that. So there were a number of things where it was coming out, this dirty hand and, corruptness. And then the whole world knew that all these ISIS people were going in through Turkey. But I think, bureaucracies are slow. And in the beginning, I think everyone was searching for what is the right partner. And the Americans were drained from being in Iraq, didn't want to put boots on the ground again. And we're thinking, who could be our partner? And I think we're sadly mistaken with the Free Syrian Army, which, we speak of as though it was some monolith. And we were certainly supporting Turkey when they had these groups to Turkey to equip them. But I think Turkey's game was, if you're a true jihadist, if you're an Islamist, we support you. And if you're just want to get rid of Assad and you're more democratic leaning, we're less interested in you. At least this is what I've heard from people that I interviewed that went to those meetings in Turkey. And they were upset with that. And they were saying this was when ISIS was first setting up in Raqqa. And so I think that the US needed things from Turkey, was working with Turkey. I think everyone was figuring out which groups serve our needs best. And from Erdogan's point of view, the groups that were more Islamist leaning probably served his needs best. And anyone that would fight the Kurds. I mean, he was more interested in fighting the Kurds probably than anything.
Right.
And that's disturbing too, when you see when Trump greenlighted Turkey to go into northeast Syria, how many civilians were killed. And now we see the rapes in Afrin and the horrible human rights violations from Turkish-backed rebels. But again, you don't see an interest in human rights, rule of law. You see much more of an interest in supporting a certain type of actor, especially if they'll keep the Kurds down. And you'll never convince me that every Kurd walking is a terrorist. I mean, I'm sure there are Kurdish terrorists, but the ones in northeast Syria, the SDF, seem like they've, really partnered with the US and tried to take a stance of, we'll do self-defense, but, we're willing to step away from the PKK to be our own entity.
Right. My last question, Annie. So I understand that in the past, Turkish government, Turkish intelligence security services had close relations with ISIS, but is it still that close? Is it still going on, or they distanced themselves from ISIS? How do you see it now?
I think we have to see everybody on a spectrum. I know of one case, I can't quote the name to you, but I know of the case of someone that came back to the Netherlands, and he was being prosecuted for being in ISIS and was going to be put in prison. And one of the things that he said in his defense case was, I don't think he was in ISIS. I think he was a foreign fighter. And he said, the group that I was in, you supplied weapons to. So how can I be guilty when my country was supplying weapons to this very group? And I thought, wow, he's really got a point. And we see the spectrum with every country that wanted to fight against Assad and that ultimately joined the fight against ISIS, that you see this struggling for who's the right partner and making a lot of mistakes. So my country made a lot of mistakes. Everybody made a lot of mistakes. And we didn't, I believe we got the good partner when we partnered with the SDF, because, when Kobani was attacked, the Kurds organized and made a really brave fight, and they were willing to be our boots on the ground for our air service. But Turkey did enter the fight to fight ISIS, and they did a good job of it. They took over Manbij, and they've done an incredible job. But then we get these mixed messages when they've helped people get out of Camp al-Hol illegally, when they've backed Turkish rebels that some of them are former ISIS members, spouting out ideology that's militant jihadist ideology. So is Turkey still in bed with ISIS? Probably not. But, have they cleaned up everything? Probably have a ways to go. And I hope they go the whole way. But all of our countries made mistakes.
Right. So, Annie, thank you so much for joining us. It was an incredible interview. Thank you.
You're welcome. Nice to meet you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.